You're listening to the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920, The Jersey.
All right, welcome back in. Was reading an article earlier this morning on NJ.com by Eliot Shorr-Parks, who covers the Eagles for that fine website, and he had a headline that said, "Has Howie Roseman really addressed the Eagles' biggest needs?" And it goes into how, in Eliot's opinion, they improved wide receiver, but cornerback and running backs, Howie did not do a great job at that. And it ends the article by saying, for now, though, Roseman's solutions to improving the Eagles' biggest areas of needs for the 2017 season are mostly underwhelming and could come back to haunt this team next season. So let's go to the man that is behind the article, and that, of course, is Eliot Shorr-Parks from NJ.com, who's kind enough to hop on board the Zach Gelb Show on this Tuesday. Eliot, appreciate a few minutes. Thanks for the time, and how are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming on. So basically your article, like I was saying, said that Howie Roseman fixed the wide receivers for this year, but not so much at the running back or cornerback position. Just take me through a little bit further how for this year of 2017, how you view the corners for the Eagles and also the running backs.
Well, I mean, I think the important thing to note is when we're talking with the article, I was only talking about the 17 season. So a lot of people have said to me, oh, well, they got Sidney Jones. Well, yeah, Sidney Jones is a great pick. I think it was their best pick of the draft. Sidney Jones isn't playing in 2017. So if you look at only 2017, he signed Patrick Robinson, who, you know, maybe he'll end up being a steal, but he signed a one-year deal for $1 million. He did not have a good season last year with the Colts, so I don't consider him an upgrade over Nolan Carroll. And then he drafted Rasul Douglas, who I like as a prospect, but if you're talking about a third-round pick coming in, going to probably have to start or play significant time coming into a defensive scheme where he's not familiar with it. He didn't do a lot of press coverage, press man coverage at West Virginia. He did a lot of zones. So counting on him to be, you know, a difference maker next year, that's risky in my opinion. So if you look at what they've actually done at cornerback, I don't see how you can say they're considerably better. And if I'm an Eagles fan, that's disappointing because you knew that the biggest need of this team was cornerback coming into the offseason.
Now, let me just play devil's advocate because I do agree with you to some extent that they did not fix corner and running back for this upcoming season. But one could argue that they improved the defensive line, so wouldn't that help out the secondary?
Yeah, I think to a certain degree. But at the end of the day, if your corners can't cover, you better have one of the best defensive lines ever because, you know, I mean, the Eagles had a decent defensive line last year, and their cornerbacks were a major problem. I know they only ended with 16.5 sacks, but Brandon Graham got pretty good pressure. Fletcher Cox had probably not the season you were looking for, but still a decent year. So, you know, I agree the defensive line could help the cornerback situation, but I think it's safe to say that when the Eagles are ready to contend, their cornerbacks are not going to be, or I would be surprised if they were Patrick Robinson and, you know, Rasul Douglas.
I think everyone can agree that the Eagles, for this upcoming season, they have a better roster compared to last season just because of what they did at wide receiver, and that will help the quarterback in Carson Wentz. It seems like that you're a little bit annoyed about the lack of urgency that Howie Roseman is showing. Is that fair to say?
Well, I don't think I'm annoyed by it, but I would say that, I mean, if you look at the solutions, the solutions to the Eagles' main problems for this offseason, in my opinion, are not impressive. I don't think when you look at, you know, everyone says the Eagles didn't have a lot of money to spend. Well, they handed out around $16 or $17 million in cap hit. So, you know, they did have money to spend. They signed Alshon Jeffrey to a huge deal. They could have signed one of the elite cornerbacks that were available. And then you talk about, you know, I've heard it for 3 or 4 months. This 2017 draft is elite at cornerback and running back. The Eagles are able to get a player, no problem, in the 3rd or 4th round. Well, I don't think they ended up with a player from the draft that you can say is going to considerably help them next year, outside of Derek Barnett, but I'm talking at just corner and running back. So I just think, again, if you look at what the problems were, it's hard for me to look and say how he's done a good job fixing them.
I'm going to ask you the multi-million-dollar question. With Howie Roseman, as you have to find that balance of what helps the team this year and then what helps the team long-term when you're in this situation, building the team with the quarterback that you have. But since you don't think he did a great job addressing the need for this upcoming year, there could be a chance that the Eagles regress in terms of record, although I don't think that's going to be the case. But it makes you wonder, how long is the leash for one Howie Roseman?
Well, I think the leash on Howie is long, just because of, you know, it seems like Jeffrey Lurie really believes him. I don't think Howie is close to being in any types of trouble when it comes to his job. But I agree with you. I mean, I don't think the Eagles are going to regress next year because I simply think Carson Wentz is a franchise quarterback. And if you have a franchise quarterback, think the Eagles have a good offensive line. I think they have a good defensive line. You're going to win a lot of games. So I do think the Eagles could be in playoff contention next year, and that's one of the reasons why when everyone says take this long view, it'll be interesting to see if in Week 10, if these cornerbacks are struggling and they don't have a running back that they can trust, and they're in the race for the division and they end up missing out, it'll be interesting to see if fans feel that same way that they do now.
Now, with the corners that they just drafted, you don't expect Jones not to play this year. You don't think he'll be on the field this year. But in terms of the other one in Douglas, I think that could be a difficult spot because they're asking a lot from him very early with the lack of talent at corner.
Yeah, I mean, when I say I don't like the Rasul Douglas pick, it really doesn't have much to do with Rasul Douglas, the player. I mean, but the thing is, if you would have signed a free agent cornerback early or in the offseason, you could count on more than you'll be able to count on Patrick Robinson. Or if you drafted a cornerback in the second round that was going to play in 2017, then there's not as much pressure on Rasul Douglas. But I think the spot they're putting Rasul Douglas in, if he succeeds in it, I'll be extremely impressed, and it'll be a good pick. But I just think he's walking into a tough situation.
What's your expectation level and your level of confidence in Jalen Mills for this year?
So I like Jalen Mills more than other people. I liked what he showed last year in terms of just his willingness to match up with the best receivers. Didn't let anything get to him. Clearly he had some plays he'd probably like to have back, but overall I don't think he was as bad as people make him out to be. So I think he's a player that, a lot like Landon Collins with the Giants, where the first year he didn't have a great year, but he bounced back and had a great second year. I think Jalen Mills has a chance to make a big leap next year.
Eliot Shorr-Parks with us right now on the Zach Gelb Show. So I was reading another one of your articles that you watch every snap of Derek Barnett's college career. Well, God bless you for doing that. Give us a breakdown of what you saw out of Barnett.
So with Barnett, I will say the two things that I really liked watching was he had a quick first step off the line of scrimmage. And a lot of times in college, he simply just ran by opposing offensive tackles. The other thing that I saw from him that I liked was he's a great hustle player. And, I'm not normally one to be like, oh, he tries hard. He deserves credit for that, because I think players obviously should be trying all the time. But, there's a lot of plays that you watch where Barnett's on the other side of the field, or he tracks down, or he keeps running after a running back. I mean, it was just impressive. He never stopped, and I think that's worth noting. Some of the concerns I had with him, though, are he really did just run by offensive tackles, and I'm not sure if in the NFL, if when he faces stronger, quicker, more elite offensive tackle players, I don't see him winning consistently once he engages with a tackle. And I think that's going to be a problem for him at the next level.
Now, you also said in one of your other articles you don't see him, the ceiling doesn't seem extremely high, and you're skeptical if he could be a player that could make a Pro Bowl. How do you make that analysis this early in his career? Because for me, that seems a little bit premature when the guy just got drafted.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not saying it could never happen. What I'm saying is I look at how he won in college, and he won not by physically, imposing himself over other players, but I don't see that elite physical skill that I think a lot of Pro Bowl players have. I mean, a long time ago when I used to work for G. Cobb, Gary Cobb used to play for the Eagles, he told me that to succeed in the NFL, you need one elite skill. You don't have to be good at everything, but you have to have one thing that you're elite at. And when I look at Barnett, I'm not so sure I see an elite skill. I don't think he's fast. I don't think he has elite quickness for the defensive end position. I don't think he has great arm length or size. And I don't think he's extremely strong. I think he's going to be able to push over offensive tackle. So my concern with Barnett is I'm not so sure I see that one trait that I know every Sunday he'll have a leg up, or at least be, he'll have a leg up on other players.
I know some other people are advocating for Allen and Malik Hooker. Would you have gone that route instead if you were the Eagles with Howie Roseman?
Oh, I can see arguments for and against both of those players. Malik Hooker, it depends. We'll see what happens with Malcolm Jenkins in 2018. So you can make an argument maybe safety's in need. Jonathan Allen, the fact that he fell that far, I'm wondering if maybe there was some medical concerns there that, teams knew that we aren't privy to. And I'm not so sure he's a fit on the Eagles line anyway. He's more of a defensive tackle than a defensive end in a 4-3. I would have taken Dalvin Cook, but I realize that's not, the popular opinion or realistic. I just think he's an instant impact player and the best running back in the draft. So that's somebody I would have considered. But I can't kill them for the selection of Barnett because, as you just kind of mentioned, there weren't a ton of other great options.
Now, when they got into the later rounds, we're talking Eliot Shorr-Parks. I can't say any of these players are going to be sure things, but I like what they did from rounds 4 and on with Gibson and Hollins and also Pumphrey. Just break down a little bit about those three players and what you think they could add to this year's team.
Yeah. Well, I think Gibson could maybe be playing significant amount of snaps by week 1 because I think he brings exactly what the Eagles need, which is a speed wide receiver on the outside. I think he complements Alshon Jeffrey perfectly. We'll see what Torrey Smith is able to bring, but I think Gibson was a really good pick for the 5th round. Donnell Pumphrey, I'm not as high on as others just simply because he is a small player, and I'll be interested to see how he can hold up against the bigger athletes of the NFL. And Matt Collins, Howie said he could have been a 2nd-round pick if it wasn't for a collarbone injury. If that's true, then I guess they got a steal. I think he'll be a very good special teams player. He does have an impressive resume from his time at UNC, 20 touchdowns. He averaged over 20 yards a catch. So I think he could be a potential steal as well. So I do like those picks. I just think when grading an NFL draft, to me, you have to look at those first 3 rounds, and that's where I really wasn't overly impressed with what Howie did.
Do you expect DGB and Aguilar, and I know it's a 2-part question, do you expect them to be on the team, the 53-man roster, when the season does commence?
I'd be really surprised if DGB was, just because they can cut him and save money, and I think they've kind of drafted his replacement in Matt Collins. As far as Aguilar, I think he has a decent shot of being on the roster for 2 reasons. One, if you cut him, it's going to cost more to cut him than it is to keep him. So that, obviously they have some incentive to keep him. But also, I think he's a guy that now that he's not going to be, the first or second option, he's not going to be that starter on the outside, I think he could really be in for a big year. At least, a big year for a 3rd or 4th receiver. I think he's going to show some improvements, and I actually think he'll be a contributing player on the roster.
What would be a big year for him? Because I've been someone that's bashed Nelson Aguilar time and time again, and I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel of this being a positive story.
Right. Well, I don't think he's going to be
Sure.
8 or 9 touchdowns, but if he's 3rd or 4th on the team in targets, obviously at that point he's not matching up against other teams' best cornerback or even their 2nd best cornerback. He's a guy that's going to come in, play sporadically. And I don't know in terms of stats what a big year for him would be, but it wouldn't surprise me if this time next year we're talking about Aguilar taking a step forward and maybe being on the team longer than some expect.
Wow, I'd be shocked, but hey, the Eagles better than most as we're talking Eliot Shorr-Parks. 2 more questions before we let you run. Eagles offseason, if you had to give me a letter grade for it, how would you grade it?
I think it's been about a C minus maybe. I think when you talk about, what were his best moves? I like the trade for Timmy Jernigan. I like getting Alshon, but, that's on a 1-year deal, and I'd be curious to see how that plays out. And as I kind of talked about at the beginning of the, of our interview, is they didn't really address the need at cornerback or running back. And to me, that was really what you had to grade Howie on. So and overall, out of the 3 big needs, he hasn't addressed 2 of them. So it's kind of hard for me to be, give him too much praise for what he's done.
I know you said that there's a chance they can make the playoffs. If you had to put a percentage on that, what's the likelihood they make the playoffs for next year?
That's tough. I would say 60 to 70%. I don't think the NFC is going to be as good as people think. I think the Cowboys are going to fall off quite a bit. The Redskins are a bit of a wild card, but I think the Eagles are right there with all those teams. So if Carson Wentz can play better than he did last year, and I thought he showed signs last year, but if he can put it all together, I think the Eagles will be a much improved team. I think they're going to win 9 games. So, if they can get to 10, it wouldn't surprise me if that got a bit.
And finally, before we let you run, since we talked so much about Howie, let's get to the coach and Peterson. Your confidence level entering year number 2 is where with Doug?
Doug was better last year than I expected. I thought he was a little reckless at times with some of the 4th down attempts and the 2-point conversion against the Ravens. So it'll be interesting to see this year if they are in a playoff race, if he's a little more conservative. But I was impressed with the job that Doug did overall. And for all the skepticism there was about him coming in, I think he was better than expected.
Well, Eliot, we appreciate the time. We hear a lot of optimism. We also hear you be very critical. We like both sides of it. Eliot, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, talk to you soon.
There's Eliot Shorr-Parks from NJ.com. That's very interesting because the article he wrote today, he was not very high on Howie Roseman and the job that he's done in this offseason. But he still thinks that he put out a 60 to 70% chance that they can make the playoffs. That's higher than I would go. And I broke down the schedule. I gave you the case for why they could get 10 wins. I think 9 wins is more likely. And maybe they only get a 1-win improvement and they only get 8 wins. But you hear a lot of optimistic feels from one Eliot Shorr-Parks. Then you get a lot of pessimistic feelings from one Eliot Shorr-Parks with this team. But when I read that article, I didn't think he would be that optimistic today about the team's outlook for next season. But I get what he's saying. His point makes sense. And that is the part and the dilemma that Howie Roseman's in. Because Howie Roseman needs to address this team and can't just make a quick fix. He needs to address it for the long-term development of this franchise with the quarterback that you have. Everyone wants the quarterback. You have the quarterback. Now it's the corresponding moves about what you surround that quarterback with on the offensive, defensive side of the ball, and also on special teams to make this team moving in the right direction. And if the Eagles don't make the playoffs next year, it's not a failure. No. If they go and regress to 5 or 6 wins, then yes, that's a failure. But if they go 8-8, if they go 9-7 and miss out on the playoffs, so be it. I've always said, because I believe the leash on Howie Roseman's very long. Him and Jeffrey Lurie, I don't know what pictures Howie Roseman has of Mr. Lurie. But this has been my timetable. And I've said it for Howie, and I said it for Doug. And you need to reset it on Howie when he was put back into power a year ago, after they said goodbye to Chip and good riddance to Chip. But he got last year. He gets this year. And then year number 3, they need to make the playoffs. And after year number 3, going into year number 4, if you're in that offseason, if you say to yourself, we don't believe that this team can legitimately compete for a Super Bowl, then you got to say goodbye to Howie and also Doug. So I give Howie and I give Doug this year, and we'll see what they do this year and how they improve. But with the draft, I like Barnett. I think Jones is a good investment. Pumphrey I'm more high on than other people are. And also the receivers that they got. If you look at those receivers in Gibson and Hollins, Gibson, we'll run down the numbers later on in the show. But this guy is good for a big catch, what it seems like almost every game. There's been some games that he only had about a 9-yard reception or a 10-yard reception, but we're seeing consistently 45, 55, 60, 70-yard receptions. And that's something that, for a player that was picked in the 5th round, you absolutely take if he could give you a few of those in this season and could mesh and could gel with Carson Wentz. And then in terms of Hollins, fantastic special teams player. Over 1,600 yards at UNC, 20 touchdowns. I see him go up and get some balls that no one last year on the Eagles wide receiving core besides Matthews could do. And this is a player that the one problem are injuries. Overall, I thought the Eagles had a good draft, not a great draft. And time will tell if it could be a great draft. But overall, I thought they did a nice job. And I get it, why some fans don't like it, because Barnett is not the sexy name, but look at the stats that he had in college. And I understand some fans could say, oh, why waste the year with Sidney Jones? Well, that's a good investment. At 43 or whatever the Eagles were at, this was a player that before he had the Achilles injury, this was a player that was going to be a top 15 pick in the draft. I'm not the biggest fan. I'm not the biggest supporter of Howie Roseman by any stretch. I'm not. He's made some stupid moves, like giving Vinny Curry that big contract. But overall, if I had to give it a grade on what he did this offseason, I'd say it's about a B, B-. It was an okay offseason. Yeah, Eliot's right. They didn't drastically improve corner for this year. They didn't drastically improve running back. But maybe Pumphrey becomes the real deal. Time will tell. And I know Eagles fans are sick and tired of hearing time will tell because they've been waiting a Super Bowl their entire existence. But time will tell on this regime. And like I said, they got last year. You're 1 year in. Now you're on year number 2. See an improvement this year. Then in year number 3, make the playoffs. That's the timetable for me. 609-919-9200. 4:35 is the time in the Princeton Orthopedic Associates studios. This is the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. What we'll do right now is we will take a break. When we come back, we'll give you some of the lineups for the baseball games coming up later tonight. Last night, Phillies get the victory. You have the Mets with the victory, and the Yankees get blown out by the Blue Jays. So we'll give you some lineups when we come back. Also, we graded the Eagles offseason. We'll also grade the Giants offseason and go a little bit further on the Eagles offseason as well. And I'll read you something from the Players Tribune about Sidney Jones. Zach Gelb Show, 4:35. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. 609-919-9200.